post a funny comment to be featured next. As I entered the abandoned tunnel with Bourbon, I wondered if I had been wrong to trust him. But the other tunnels had been sealed, and there was no telling when I'd have another chance to leave Riga. Bourbon had led me far behind the tent city, and bypassing the barricade via a passage he had found, Bourbon and I began our journey. He was an interesting creature, both cunning and quietly mad. I think mad because of, well, I can't say what exactly. It was in how he carried himself, how he spoke, and, of course, any man who thought I'd be a valuable asset after only one conversation and some hearsay surely had to have a few screws loose, and that made him unpredictable. So I made sure to keep Bourbon in front of me, letting him take point, as it were. The confidence with which he bypassed the guards back at Riga assured me of his criminal nature, or at least he was, how you say, criminally inclined. The tunnel was a mess, even by the standards of the metro. The line was barely visible underneath dirt and scrap. Most of the red emergency lights had been blown out, and what little light there was came from the bioluminescence of mushrooms growing against the walls. "How long did you say this tunnel had been unused for?" I asked. Bourbon made no secret of the macabre grin on his lips and said, "Long enough. Don't worry yourself with that. Just don't be stupid, and it'll be fine." Don't be stupid. Right. This coming from the guy who, on the way here, had insisted on humming the old Soviet anthem over and over again. Lots of tough guys died in these tunnels, but if we watch each other's backs, we'll get there. Oh, how encouraging. I think Bourbon had started to sense my hesitancy, and though I think it amused him in a sick way, he was smart enough to try and keep me cool-headed. As we passed by a junction, a long, dull whining echoed through the tunnel. It was a metallic sound, rusty and droning, and it seemed to come from all around us as the sound pinged off the walls. I froze, and Bourbon looked back at me like I was a skittish little kid, which, looking back at it now, I suppose I was. He motioned to my hands, and I quickly realized that my finger had found its way onto the trigger of my machine gun. I sagged and exhaled, noting how my breath looked in the light of our torches. "Sorry, thanks." I rested my finger on the trigger guard, and I heard Sukhoi in my head barking his old instructions on trigger discipline. Bourbon turned to face me, walking backwards as he did. "Strange sounds," he began, pointing to the tunnel around us. "Either the tunnel is making that noise or the wind is. I've also heard tales of singing pipes." "Singing pipes?" Bourbon nodded and chuckled a little. "Yeah, they say if you listen long enough, you can hear the voices of the dead." Flashes of Eugene's story played in my mind's eye, and I tried to hide my shiver. "What bullshit?" I said. Bourbon went on, and his words melted into the background as I went into my thoughts and tried to focus on walking. He must have asked a question or something, as I remember vaguely how he chided me as I said nothing. No. Instead, I found myself remembering something Sukhoi had once said. Something about the uniqueness of every tunnel. How each one has its own melody. Sukhoi probably just wanted to express his thought beautifully, but remembering the droning whine I had heard just moments before, I thought that I had heard such a melody. What I had heard, what I was listening to, really listening to, was the melody of the tunnel. However, half an hour later, the memory had faded, and I couldn't be at all sure that any of it had really happened, that I hadn't imagined it. Maybe the noise I had heard was entirely divorced from Bourbon's talk of strange sounds, of voices in pipes. Okay, you probably haven't been ignoring me on purpose. You've just got shit for brains, Bourbon said in consolation. If I'm not very nice to you, I'm sorry. This is stressful work. But, okay, we got out of Riga, so that's good. Now we have to trudge to the next station without being stopped. Then we can, relax, if everything is quiet. So, I digressed. Is it okay that we're just walking along the line like this? I mean, if there's a caravan leaving from exhibition with less than 3 people, then it doesn't leave. You need a rear guard and basically, I said, looking behind myself. Well, there are pluses, of course, to going in the caravan with a rear guard and all that. Bourbon started to explain. But listen here, there's a concrete minus to that too. I used to be pissed scared of the tunnels. Forget 3 people. I used to never go anywhere without at least 5 people. You think it helped? Doesn't help in the least. Take this for example. Once we were moving cargo, so basically we had protection. Two in front, 3 in the middle, and of course the rear guard. Everything as it should be. We were going from Tetruskovskaya to one of those... What was its name? Oh, I don't know. One of those communist stations. Damn commies. Always renaming things. Anyway, the tunnel was okay, but there was something about it. Something that I didn't altogether like. A certain decaying. And there was this fog, too. You couldn't see for shit. Not 5 paces ahead. And you bet that the flashlights didn't help much either. So we decided to tie a rope to the belt of the guy of the rear guard, to one of the guys in the middle, all the way up to one of the guys in the front. So no one would get lost in the fog. And we were moving along at an easy pace. And everything is normal. Quiet. And there's no need to rush. We hadn't encountered anyone yet, touch wood, and we had about 40 minutes to go. But we did it in faster than that time in the end. His words twisted, and he went silent for a little while. So, somewhere in the middle, this guy, I forget his name, asks the rear guard something, and the rear guard doesn't answer. So he asks again, and nothing. So he pulls on the rope, and the whole thing comes towards him with no resistance. It was bitten right through. Really, bitten through. And there was even some wet gunk on the end of it. And the rear guard was nowhere to be seen. And none of us heard a damn thing. Nothing at all. I was in the middle next to the guy that pulled the rope. And of course, he shows me the end of it. And my knees quaked. Of course, we shouted back at the rear guard, but we didn't hear anything. There wasn't anyone there to answer. So we exchanged glances, and let me tell you, we made it to the next station in no time. Well, maybe the guy was just playing a joke on you, I asked hopefully. A joke? Well, he hasn't been seen since, so that's one hell of a joke. Let me tell you, kid, if it's your time, it's your time, and there's nothing, no gun or God, that can help you. So, caravan or no, it makes no difference. So now, everywhere I go in a twosome, with a partner, if you like. Bourbon went silent, and I was again left to my thoughts. The tunnel wasn't too bad here as we had gone along. The ground was a little damp, and there was a dark, thin stream beside the rails, heading in the same direction we were. Somewhere in the darkness, I heard a thin sound, like a nail grinding on glass, and I winced in aversion. The little beasts couldn't be seen yet, but their presence could already be felt. Ugh. Rats! I spat out the word, the vile word, feeling a chill run along my skin. They still visited my nightmares, even now as a man, even though my childhood was something of a blur. That fear had stayed with me. It was part of the reason Eugene tried all those years ago to scare me with stories of my mother being eaten alive by rats. It never happened, but it was an image that lived in my mind vividly. A terrible, dark moment wherein an entire station was drowned in a flood of rats. I wiped down the goosebumps developing on my arm. My phobia, as it was, came and went. I could go months never hearing a rat, thus never fearing a rat. But then, all I'd need was to be reminded of their existence, and sure enough, the mental image of people drowning in rats, opening their mouths to scream, and then the fat, furry bodies clambering down their throats as others burrowed into their backs. That image could never be erased from my mind. It was like a needle that was pulled out but got stuck in the body. It travels around, having been pushed in by an insufficiently trained doctor. At first, it will hide and stay still, but after a time, an unknown force will set it in motion, and it will make its pernicious way through the arteries, through the nerves, ripping up organs and dooming its carrier to intolerable torment. The image of the rat-drowned station, of the blind cruelty, of the insatiable fury of those beasts, of the indescribable horror that the steel needle left in my subconscious, only came to me at their presence. The mere sight of them, the mere smell of them, created an electric discharge in me, causing my body to shudder in reflex. There were almost no rats at exhibition. There were traps everywhere, and poison had been spread around, so I had become used to them. But they swarmed through the rest of the metro. And I guess I hadn't thought about that, or rather, had put it out of my mind when I decided to go on this journey. "What's up, boy? You afraid of rats?" Bourbon inquired maliciously. "Don't like them. You're painfully spoiled. But get used to it. They're everywhere. But that's okay. It's good even. You'll never go hungry." He added and winked, whilst I was starting to feel nauseous. "But really," Bourbon continued seriously, "you're better to be afraid where there is no rats. If there's no rats, then there's been some bad trouble. And if there's no people either, well, then you want to be afraid. But if the rats are running, then it's all normal, business as usual. Get it? There are people, and then there are people. And I definitely didn't want to share my suffering with this guy. So I nodded and didn't say anything. There weren't that many rats, and they ran away from the light of the flashlights, so you hardly noticed them. But anyway, One of them managed to get underfoot, and I felt myself stepping on something soft and slippery, only to hear a shrill squeal. It was then that I lost my balance, and I almost fell face forward with all of my equipment. "Don't be afraid, boy, don't be afraid." Bourbon tried to cheer me up. "It gets worse. There's a couple of passages in this shithole teeming with them, and you have to walk on the rails, and you're walking and crunching them underfoot." He snorted meanly for effect. I frowned. I was still silent, but I was squeezing my fists. I would have punched Bourbon right then and there in his grinning face with pleasure. G'day guys, I hope you enjoyed that story and thank you so much for giving it a listen. Remember, if you want some more scary stories, you can go to the Scary Stories for Late Nights playlist. Duskbowl has been a fantastic project to work on, and remember, if you've got any fanfic or fan art or any just questions about the series, feel free to email me at duskbowl.fm@gmail.com. I love every single one of you, and you've made being a microtuber probably one of the best experiences of my life. I want to give special thanks to my patrons, of course, being Lady Nevermore, Skulk Queen, Catherine Gordon, The Curator, and Stephen Stevens. If you see them in the comments, please say g'day. And to all of you, I bid you logs of love and shit shippers.